difference in behavior of jihadi organization poses. Let me. So I want to start with a quote from an interview I did with a jihadi defector. And here is what he was saying. In Lake Chad, which means in ISWAP, for anything you need a permit. And the leaders need to understand what is going on before granting authorizations. Before, which means under JAS, people were just doing according to their wishes. You would have low-level commanders going for their own loot. In Lake Chad, again in ISWAP, you need to ask for permission. The Munzir asked the Qaid asked the Amirul Fiya. In Sambisa, again, with JAS, they do what they like. And so, this quote points to the importance of organizational issues, two very substantially different models in a broader jihadi tendency in Nigeria. In the discussion on the various jihadi movements in Africa, there's a lot of attention paid and a lot of speculation about international connections, about the circulation of weapons, of monies, and fighters. I would say that perhaps weapons and monies and fighters is not the most dangerous thing that can circulate from a global jihadi organization to a local franchise. I think actually management ideas, organizational models circulates very well. And because of this, part of the jihad in Nigeria was able to rationalize, to develop a new organizational practice. And this is what the presentation is about. It's about the way in which ISWAP rationalized and the sort of impact it has had on the trajectory of jihad in Nigeria. It's a story I want to tell because, as you know, in Mozambique, the jihadis are also operating under the mantle of the Islamic State. And so I suspect that, with ISWAP having had a head start on the jihadi Mozambicans, maybe there's a way in which the story I want to tell can help you be attentive to certain changes within the Mozambican jihad. And I want to do this in three main moments. First of all, explain what I mean by rationalization, then discuss why and how it happens, and then also discuss what it does, does it work? So first of all, what I mean by rationalization. Well, I don't mean that ISWAP is right and that JAS is, absurd or idiotic or irreflective. What I mean, I understand rationalization as per Max Weber. Rationalization is a systematic means-ends calculation. And it's a specific way to relate to the world, which has to do with a lot of techniques and gear, bureaucracy, paperwork, archives, internal control, a separation between public and private, the creation of individual rosters, specialized training, internal reporting, the rotation of officials, specialized offices with computers and ventilators so that the computers don't heat up too much. Essentially a deliberate attempt at predictability, sustainability, the management of rare resources. In the case of Lake Chad, this has meant developing a taxation system. JAS, which was the initial movement, was just plundering away, destroying everything. But ISWAP reached out to civilians to try and recreate regulated taxation, negotiated taxation, regulated taxation instead of plunder. Rationalization also means, translates into something when it comes to the penalty that the jihadis use. JAS was massively using hudud punishment. So those very spectacular, extremely violent, Sharia law-inspired things like decapitation, stoning, and whippings. ISWAP works differently. They want to manage a limited workforce, and so they cut down hudud to a significant extent, and they developed actually prison, with prison serving as a way to reform people and improve their behavior to their standards. So you could say Michel Foucault, the shift from punishment to disciplining through prison, it's also part of the sort of rationalization that we can observe in Nigeria. And of course, this rationalization has been implemented very unevenly. The payment of salaries, for instance, seems to be very unsteady. But you really see it in so many ways in the stories you get from former associates of the movement, that ISWAP was really trying to do something else than jazz. There's a very strong contrast there. Jazz was very much, if you want, what Weber would say, a traditional or a patrimonial way of functioning, depending on a bond of trust, personal bond of trust, personal loyalty to a commander, rather than an impersonal affiliation to a project. So this is essentially what I mean by rationalization. So how did the Nigerian jihad got rationalized? Well, it's not easy to find the origin of this. You could say it began in 2015 when JAS pledged allegiance to the Islamic State, or in 2016 when part of this movement actually separated from Shekau, from the historic leader, and secured the recognition of the Islamic State. And then you have those two different factions, and the Islamic State West Africa province then implements very fully this rationalizing process. And it's important, like 2015, it's an important moment. It's a moment when Nigeria finally gets its acts together and organizes a regional counteroffensive in collaboration with the neighboring states. And Shekau, the leader of jihad in Nigeria so far, loses a lot of ground. He loses a number of major cities, well, not major, but big cities that he had captured in the northeast. And so they fall back in the forest, they have to hide, they have to run for their lives, and the movement is in crisis. And this crisis energizes internal critics. There had long been internal critics within the movement, but because of the defeat, they were re-energized, and they began calling into question more explicitly Shekau. And to do that, they were looking in the direction of the Islamic State, with which contacts had been established. And Shekau actually was feeling the pressure. He resisted allegiance to the Islamic State because he realized that pledging to the Islamic State might mean he would lose the sort of personal absolute control that he had over the organization. Nevertheless, because of the defeat, he had to pledge in 2015 because of internal critics and because he was hoping maybe the Islamic State could help him. But then he resisted the changes that the Islamic State suggested in the management of the organization. And so around 2016, those internal critics basically seceded and broke from Shekau, leaving his main base in the Sambisa forest and taking refuge in the Lake Chad, which is a marshy area. It's very good for insurgency. And there, they began implementing all those changes that I mentioned. So it's a story, in fact, where you've got internal demand for reform, stirred by circumstances, defeat, meeting an external offer. The Islamic State had ideas about how to organize, how to rule, how to build a state. Yeah. So, does it work? That's my last point. Well, overall, the results have been pretty spectacular. You would expect that based on Weber. Rational is more efficient in a way. It's more productive. So it's a better system in this sense. On the ground, ISWAP has moved from being a challenger to being the top dog. You may know this, but in 2021, actually, ISWAP invaded the Sambisa forest where Shekau was, and Shekau, killed himself with a suicide vest to escape capture. And so this would seem to mean that a rationalized jihad is, so much more powerful, so much more effective. And ISWAP has been indeed a very substantial challenge ever since. But yet I want to say two things. First of all, change does not come easy.